Hi there, I am the Reverend Danny Crosby, a Unitarian minister serving congregations in Altrincham and in Urmston in the northwest of England. And I offer this devotion as a balm for the heart, for the mind, for the spirit, and for the soul. It's titled, Love is the Only Response. Deliver us to and not from the suffering in the world. Working alongside Janine, the student minister I'm currently working with, discussing her time studying at Luther King House, has got me reflecting on my time as a student minister there also many years ago now. Particularly the challenges of being a Unitarian studying alongside fellow students from traditional Christian denominations. They're very welcoming, but it's different. I know myself it took time to adjust and to find myself and my own understanding of my own personal faith really within this context. This is not easy. And it's not the only environment, of course, as a student minister. You have to find yourself during this deeply challenging and formative time. No, it's not easy, but it is what formation into ministry is all about, dare I say. We have to find ourselves within different environments. I think one of the most challenging aspects of the time in college is the assumed starting points in theological discussion and belief and understanding, really. So much is assumed where actually you may be starting from a very different place. So I've been thinking a lot about ministry these last few weeks. My journey in ministry, my time as a minister, the ministers that have helped me along the way. And I recently attended the funeral of Reverend Penny Johnson. It was a beautiful service prepared by Penny herself and of course her husband and minister, Reverend Jeff Gould, adapted and added little bits just to help bring the service alive, but she prepared it to be as close to a Sunday morning worship service as she possibly could as we told the story of her remarkable life and ministry. Penny exemplified ministry, Unitarian ministry, through her love and through her service. She ministered. I've some wonderful personal memories of Penny myself. She was especially helpful to me in my formative years in the job. Really wonderful woman. Gave so much. Before and after and even during the service, I found myself chatting with Jeff Levermore, who's a local Unitarian professor, dare I say, Professor Jeff Levermore, Nobel Prize winner, no doubt. But I was chatting with him and he always asks very probing questions, perhaps too probing you may say. One question he asked was where I would place myself on what he sees as a Unitarian spectrum of beliefs, I guess. Now I asked him what he meant by that exactly. And he explained asking if I found myself tending more towards liberal Christianity, something more of a human-centred spirituality, or more earth-centred, more naturalist kind of spirituality, or perhaps more humanist, I don't know. I said I don't really think about ministry that way. I could see that he wasn't satisfied with my answer, and so I said, well, I identify as a universalist, really, in so many ways. And he said something puzzling to me, what, a deist? And I said, no, not a deist. I don't see myself as a deist in any sense, as I understand deism anyway. In fact, if anything, I'm more of a panentheist, not a pantheist, a panentheist. Or at least if I had to put a label on something, that's where I would put a label, if you like. Now, oddly, I've not heard of panentheism. So I think some work there. I think he said he was going to go research it. Now the truth is I'm not too precious about such things as I know my primary role is to serve others. Now Reverend Penny Johnson being a wonderful example exactly of this. She saw her role and certainly the worship that she created as the key being that it relates to the world and the life in which we live and breathe and share our being and helping others to live in this world. She never wore a clerical collar and did not see herself as separate from those that she served. Although she certainly liked to dress immaculately and would wear unique things for each congregation she served. And I don't wear a collar or a stole or anything that signifies that I'm a minister. I dress smartly but unassumingly. Penny saw her role as being with the people in their struggle, and that's a perspective I share. So I wouldn't want to, and I know she didn't want to, separate herself from her congregation. Having said all that, if I was to put a label on myself, I would say, as I've said before, I am a universalist. And as a universalist, I believe there is truth in many, many different spiritual traditions, religious traditions. And yet, I have never found something that I would say the whole truth in any of them either. I don't see myself as any in a spectrum at all, actually. If anything, it is a spectrum. I just find that a difficult thing to do. I also believe my universalism, if you want to put a label on it, is I believe in a God of love that is present in all of life and yet is greater than all of life, but not like a deist idea of a God separate from life, within everything, including you and me. In everything, but somehow more than everything. That's panentheism as I understand it. And this brings with it a great responsibility. For my faith to be real, it has to be lived out in this real world, not some fantasy world that I want the world to be. And that's very challenging at times. Now, as a Frenchman said in response to my suggestion of universalism, they said this: the thing I worry about is how much input a God of love is having, in that so many are hurt and are killed. How can there be a God of love if life is the way that life is? And this seems particularly pertinent once again as we witness the horrors taking place in Israel and Palestine, the death of innocents. So many innocent lives brutally killed. It's heartbreaking to witness such horror and barbarity, and how this spreads to all over the world, really. The sorry spectacle of our inhumanity to one another. By the way, this is not a new story. It's been going on throughout our human history. Now, there are those that say this is evidence of the evils of religion. Some of us may have sympathy with this view. That said, if I look at most of the evils of the last 100 or so years, many of those that are still inflicted today, secular states are just as guilty as those that claim religion. I see no difference really in the brutality at times and the dehumanising slaughter. Think of China or North Korea or Cambodia and that whole thing about year zero, or the killing fields, or the Soviet Union in the past. Secular states, atheist states, atrocities still happened. The way I see it, most of this kind of violence and, dare I say, evil is due to our failure to recognise the sacredness of each and other's life, to see what is in ourselves in the other, of failing to see the other as our neighbour, as ourselves, I guess, that golden rule. The secular and the religious are just as culpable of this. So religion's no place either for it, you know what I mean? When people hide behind religion, saying that this is the save us from our fallen nature, well, that doesn't seem to work either. The thing is to see the sacredness in each other's eyes. When we see the other in ourselves and see ourselves in the other, for some people are just brutal to themselves. I've been there. But it is a pertinent question to ask about a God of love. How can there be a God of love when there is so much wrong? If we look at the world, at the suffering within the world, it's reasonable to ask in what sense a God of love could be involved in this. Of course, the response of many is that there is no God of love, there is no God. End of conversation. Or others will say that God is not all loving, perhaps. Maybe God does punish. Maybe it's our fault that we're being punished. Some do say that. It seems bizarre to me. It's not very loving. So God isn't loving, God is punishing. They see God that way. Others may well say it's a mystery. We can't understand how God's love operates. That doesn't seem good enough either. Then still others will suggest that we look at the helpers and that love is manifest in the action of those that come and help, that offer love and service. Do any of these answers seem adequate to you? Difficult. It certainly makes me ponder. Now, suffering and a God of love is a question that has troubled theologians, philosophers, and plain old ordinary people throughout history. The question has been asked and continues to be asked as to what causes suffering, and can suffering be overcome? Now, in some quarters it has been suggested that the root cause of suffering is human evil, which has led to the question that if evil exists, then how can God be all-powerful, ever-present and all-loving? And in Western, particularly theistic approaches, this has been known as the Theodicy dilemma, particularly the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity and Islam. I'm not going to explore the Eastern kind of approach to suffering, etc. in this conversation. That's for another day, perhaps. Now, the Theodicy dilemma may be summed up by the following question about God, asked by the 18th century philosopher David Hume. He said, "Is he willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Whence then is evil?" How can evil exist if that's the case? This seems to encapsulate the whole theodicy debate. It certainly leads to the most philosophical conversations the last 200 or so years around religion and the state of humanity, I guess, and the state of the world and suffering, certainly from a Western theistic perspective. In the 20th century, Czesław Miłosz wrote the following poem titled Theodicy. "Now it won't do, my sweet theologians. Desire will not save the morality of God. If he created beings able to choose between good and evil, and they chose, and the world lies in iniquity, nevertheless there is pain and the undeserved torture of creatures, which would find its explanation only by assuming the existence of an archetypal paradise and a pre-human downfall so grave that the world of matter received its shape from diabolic power." Hard-hitting, eh? More hard-hitting than Hume's question, I think. And this from Miłosz, a Nobel Prize-winning poet who was a Polish Catholic who spent much of his life wrestling with his own Catholic faith. He lived in the Theodicy dilemma, that great question. I do remember exploring theodicy, really explored it deeply actually, while training for the ministry. And again, it's something I've been thinking again about as I've been sharing conversations with Janine, and as I've looked at the world again. Well, you can never not look at the world. You know, I probably spent more time on that piece I wrote around the subject of theodicy than any other in my time in training. It showed in my final marks, of course, because I really wrestled and struggled with it as I explored other ideas around it and wrestled with my own heart and soul. So many of us have done so. Looking back, I can see how important it was in my formation as a minister who serves people to do that struggle and to continue with that struggle. I've been struggling with it again in the last week or so. The struggle has been so important as I have learnt in my time as a minister that a large part of the work is to be with others in their suffering, often senseless suffering, by the way. And it's of course suffering that brought me into ministry in the first place. While I was training, I remember wrestling for hours in the library and walking around in the park with this theodicy question. It was in my heart and soul and mind constantly. And I continue to do so. I've been doing so this week, had so many conversations. I have found my own unsettled faith in it, and as a result, a great purpose has emerged. If I have learned anything from suffering, it is that I cannot take away the suffering of anybody else, but I can be with them in their suffering. I think that's where I find God the most. I have learned that in so doing, the God of my limited understanding comes into being, incarnates, if you like, once more, as I'm with others in an intimate way, in a spiritually intimate way, not always just in suffering, but it seems deeper then. Now, my understanding does not fit neatly within any of the traditional Orthodox Christian views that I explored during my training, as my theology doesn't anyway, and nor should it, I guess. Shouldn't surprise me that. I did not see the suffering as a consequence of our fallen nature, as an absence of good which causes human beings to choose evil, following Augustine or Calvin. I just don't believe in that concept of original sin, if you like, that there's something wrong in our nature, that we're born with this, we can become like that, I guess, but I don't think we're just naturally made that way. Or that suffering was a part of some kind of divine plan for humanity. I had some sympathy, I think, with the views of Aquinas that somehow we can lose our way, that we lose our natural blessing, I guess. I find the idea that suffering has to take place in order for life to discover what is good a very troubling idea. I don't think it has to take place, although it often does. I cannot see how someone finding good at the expense of the suffering of others, how there is any love in that. No, I find that very difficult. That's why I was so powerfully struck by this quotation by Dorothy Sewell and her view that no heaven can rectify an Auschwitz. An extreme example of that concept, but she was highly critical of, I think, theological masochism. I think she got sadomasochism, actually, for that matter. That somehow it's a good thing because some people learn from the suffering. Well, it's good to learn from things, but do we have to suffer? Not necessarily. I do not believe that the ends ever justify the means. For me, the means are an end in themselves. If the means mean so much suffering for others just because someone reaches enlightenment, come off it. If God is present, then God is there in the suffering and in our response to that. That's when God comes alive in me so much. This is something, by the way, that Elie Wiesel explored in his seminal work, The Night. The God of my understanding comes alive in my response to suffering, in my response to life, actually. Somewhere in that space it comes alive in me and I experience it in life itself. This is love. So yes, I believe in a God of love, but not one who controls every element of life. God in life, Panentheism, but not controlling all of life. The God I believe has to come alive in through our human being, through being itself. So I believe in incarnation, just not that incarnation it happens once through the body of Christ, if you like, through Jesus. I don't believe in that unique sense of incarnation. Incarnation can occur in anything and everything, I believe. Now that may not be an adequate answer, but it's one I experience through my own fragile human being. I respond to the idea of a God of love as my experience and observations of life suggest that this is there, this power can come alive. I also experience this love coming to life as I am with those who suffer and do all I can to be with them in their pain, knowing full well I can't take it from them. But I can't prove that to you beyond doubt, and I don't even try. I can only share my experience. My growing sense of universalism and panentheism helps me to live fearfully, in love, in a world in which there is so much beauty, but also so much heartbreaking suffering, some of which is natural, but an awful lot caused by our inhumanity to one another, by not recognising the sacredness of each of us. I accept that no matter how lovingly I and others live, that horrific, dare I say, evil things will happen, both personally and universally. So where is the God of love, you may ask? Well, it comes alive in the response to this suffering. It is the God of love that allows one to come through even the most horrific situations but a response grown from a sacred reverence for life itself. This is the God of love that I worship. That is way beyond my understanding, but not my experience. It can be experienced, it is experienced in this life, and it's experienced as I am with others so powerfully. Not only then, but so powerfully then. It comes alive, it incarnates through our frail humanity. I have come to believe that it is our holy duty to respond to the suffering of others, to stand in solidarity with them and in holy compassion, and never to declare the other as somehow less than human. In my prayers, I ask this universal love to help me feel a deep connection to all life and to bring some healing to this world in which I live and the world beyond my being. It is, I believe, our holy duty to begin to bring healing to our world, to wipe the tears that flow from our humanity and to repair the tears in the fabric of the world, to bring compassion and love to those in fear, to bind up the broken and bring wholeness to those who feel separated from the love that is present in life. This is the call of love from the God of my limited understanding. It is a call that asks my senses to be open to the world, and instead of being delivered from evil, it is a call from an ever-loving God to be delivered to the suffering in this world. I am sorry if it does not answer why a God of love would allow suffering. I am sorry if it's not good enough for you listening. I am sorry. I cannot sincerely offer any more. I cannot give an opiate that relieves people of pain. I can only offer a loving response to that pain. All I can offer is a loving response that comes to life in this beautiful and at times suffering world. Now, before offering final blessing, I'd like to share with you a wonderful poem, a poem written many years ago by the recently deceased great poet Louise Gluck. The poem's called Celestial Music, and it seems pertinent at this time, and it seemed to speak to me of my thoughts and my feelings. And I first came across it in Mark Bellatini's wonderful book on grief, Nothing Gold Can Stay, The Colours of Grief. And obviously I took my grief group's title from the second half of that Mark's book, which is called The Colours of Grief. So this is Celestial Music by Louise Gluck. I have a friend who still believes in heaven. Not a stupid person, yet with all she knows, she literally talks to God. She thinks someone listens in heaven. On earth, she's unusually competent, brave too, able to face unpleasantness. We found a caterpillar dying in the dirt, greedy ants crawling over it. I'm always moved by weakness, by disaster, always eager to oppose vitality, but timid, also quick to shut my eyes, whereas my friend was able to watch, to let events play out according to nature. For my sake, she intervened, brushing a few ants off the torn thing and sat it down across the road. My friend says I shut my eyes to God, that nothing else explains my aversion to reality. She says I'm like the child who buries her head in the pillow so as not to see, the child who tells herself that light causes sadness. My friend is like the mother, patient, urging me to wake up an adult like herself, a courageous person. In my dreams, my friend reproaches me. We're walking on the same road, except it's winter now. She's telling me that when you love the world, you hear celestial music. Look up, she says. When I look up, nothing, only clouds, snow, white business in the trees, like brides leaping to a great height. Then I'm afraid for her. I see her caught in a net deliberately cast over the earth. In reality, we sit by the side of the road, watching the sunset. From time to time, the silence pierced by a bird call. It's this moment we're both trying to explain the fact that we're at ease with death, with solitude. My friend draws a circle in the dirt. Inside, the caterpillar doesn't move. She's always trying to make something whole, something beautiful, an image capable of life apart from her. We're very quiet. It's peaceful sitting here, not speaking, the composition fixed, the road turning suddenly dark, the air going cool. Here and there the rocks shining and glittering. It's this stillness that we both love. The love of form is a love of endings. A beautiful poem, a beautiful gift left as she left so many beautiful gifts by Louise Gluck, who recently died. So I'm going to end with some final words of blessing. You know, we need to bless more. We don't bless enough. And everyone can bless. We bless by offering our loving presence. We bless by giving ourselves wholeheartedly to life. Why not try offering more blessings? So may the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, may that love be in us and among us, now and always. And may the love of God come alive within us, and may it do so in all that we feel, in all that we think, in all that we say, in all that we do.